The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the ECAT staff or board of directors.
So my name is Mark Schieldrop. I'm the senior spokesperson for AAA Northeast in Massachusetts. Very happy to be here, and thank you for hosting me in this wonderful community. I'm here today to talk about electric vehicles, kind of just a little bit of background on EVs, a snapshot of where the market is today, and a little bit on our own experience at AAA with EVs, because we are starting to use them in the club. EVs are actually nothing really new in the grand scheme of things. In fact, before gasoline-powered vehicles became the dominant vehicle on the roadway, it was electric vehicles that were kind of the top dog back in the day. So here's an example of one of the very early battery-powered vehicles back in the day. And battery technology was a bit ahead of the internal combustion engine for a brief period of time. So that's where the industry was, very early on. But obviously that quickly changed really when the Model T came out, mainly because it was cheap, it was affordable, and it shortly after that, discovery of crude oil in Texas really kind of catapulted the petroleum industry and made gasoline become cheap and easily available. And then that really just kind of paved the way for the dominance of the internal combustion engine after that. So now EVs are rapidly becoming pretty commonplace on our roadways. And here in Massachusetts, you see tons of EVs on the road pretty much every day. There's a lot of Teslas out there, Chevy Bolts and other vehicles. And part of it is, people are interested in EVs just because there's a lot of people that are excited about the technology, people that have been kind of watching the industry begin to develop in the early 2000s and on. And so there were a lot of early adopters kind of waiting around to buy a commercially available, decent, reliable EV that they could use as their primary automobile. So a lot of those folks have been buying EVs quite a bit in the last few years. But there's some energy behind it as well, coming from the government and other forces, really. There's a big emphasis around the world to reduce our carbon emissions. As you can see, transportation is the leading source of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. That's based on EPA data from 2022, based on analysis from 2020. So we may see a little bit of change in those numbers over the last few years, but the reality is that transportation is a huge source of carbon emissions. So there's a push around the world to electrify transportation, to reduce those emissions and find ways to generate the electricity in clean ways. And when we look at that pie chart and we say, how do we decarbonize the environment? Obviously, transportation is kind of the low-hanging fruit right there because it's the leading cause. There's also been a lot of government investment in EV infrastructure. The bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed not too long ago really put a lot of money behind EV charging infrastructure, money for things like school districts buying electric school buses, which we've been seeing a little bit in Massachusetts. The Inflation Reduction Act gave some tax credits for buying EVs. It supplied more funds for existing EV rebate programs, similar to the federal EV tax credit that a lot of people use to shave some money off the purchase price of the car. State incentives. Also, there were some mandates that were passed in the past couple of years to basically outlaw the sale of internal combustion engine powered vehicles in those states starting in 2035. Now that's likely to get pushed back a little bit, just based on the reality of the market, where the infrastructure is not quite there. the market for EVs that are available to people isn't quite there. And there's some product segments where an EV just isn't feasible. At AAA, for example, you can't buy an electric tow truck. They're just not commercially available. So we would buy them if we could, but we can't. The other thing that people are interested in EVs, one of the reasons is not just environmental, but also money. But an example of EV versus gas emissions. Not a lot of people hear, if you go on social media, or you hear people that are skeptical of EVs or critical of them, they'll say, oh, well, lithium mining is really damaging the environment. The power plants that produce the electricity to charge your vehicle, those are all emitting carbon emissions, so it's kind of a wash, but in reality, that's not true at all. So this is an example of a comparison of two roughly equivalent vehicles, a Hyundai Ioniq 5 and then the Hyundai Tucson. When you look at basically the environmental impact in terms of how much carbon gets put in the environment during that vehicle's life cycle, and that includes, the charging, not just, the car driving around, but the charging and everything else, drastically lower by a factor of almost 6. So EVs are much better for the environment from a carbon emission perspective, no question about it. And the EV market is growing still, even though you might be seeing headlines or hearing people saying, oh, the EV market's failing, automakers are pulling back their plans, they're down, closing factories. Now, some of that is true. Maybe the market got a little ahead of itself and the EV industry got a little overheated, and maybe they decided, or they thought the market would be growing a little bit faster than it is. So that is true, but when we look at overall growth of the market, it's continuing. It's totally growing. Every month, more EVs are selling year over year. And I've got some data from EIA, the Energy Information Administration up there, that shows that the growth is steady. There's a little bit of a plateauing going on, but the trend overall is growth. And you can see right there, we had a really rapid growth in a short period of time, really kind of coinciding with the COVID-19 pandemic. A whole bunch of new vehicles came onto the market then, and there was a lot of built up pressure to buy EVs. A lot of those early adopters, those people that really wanted to buy an EV, but they're just waiting for the right model to come out, or they're just waiting for the market to be ready for them. They all jumped in between about 2019 to 2021, 2022. And then after that early adopter phase, we're kind of seeing a little bit of a settling in, a little settling down on the market. And that's a picture of a Tesla Cybertruck that I saw in the Boston Common Garage a few months back when I was walking. So, you see these things all over the place, but, that vehicle's pretty distinctive. So I thought it was interesting to see it in there. So just a little breakdown of some of what the information or what the, terminology. So EVs, there's a little bit of alphabet soup out there in terms of what is out there, and a lot of people don't realize that there's a few different variations of hybrids and EVs, but generally, hybrids have been around forever. The Toyota Prius has been around for a very long time. The more and more hybrids are in the market. A lot of cars that traditionally had maybe a hybrid model that was a little more expensive than a gas-powered, they're dropping the gas-powered version because the hybrids give better mileage, but traditional hybrids, you don't plug it in. There's no external charging. It's all self-contained. The battery's conditioned and charged as you drive and all that. Plug-in hybrids are kind of the new hotness in a lot of ways. A lot of people are really gravitating to plug-in hybrids because they've got that fear of range anxiety, which is a term you hear all the time. People are worried about running out of charge while they're driving. People aren't really ready to accept that they're going to have to change their habits and their lifestyle, because when you own a fully electric vehicle, you're not going to pop in the gas station and fill up your tank in 2 minutes. You need to really think about how much charge do I have, where am I driving, how much range do I have. People don't really want to go there to an extent. Some people are totally okay with that, but your typical average consumer, when they're thinking about what the options are, the plug-in hybrid makes a lot of sense because you get all the benefits of a gas-powered vehicle, and you still actually get a lot of the benefits of driving the EV, because the latest generation of plug-in hybrids can give you anywhere from 20 to 50 miles of range on fully electric power. So that means if you have a 20 to 30 mile commute, that means you don't have to use gas for your commute. Maybe in the ride home, the gas engine might kick on a little bit, or maybe your employer offers charging at work, and so you can top off while you work, and then you're fully electric on the ride home. And then with the plug-in hybrid, you don't really have to worry about getting a charging station installed at your home. You can just plug it into a traditional regular electrical outlet, and even though that charge rate is much slower, you're only charging for about 20 to 50 miles of range, so you can generally get that on pretty much overnight, even without a higher level charger. And then fully battery electric vehicles, BEVs, that's really kind of the focus of my talk today. And those are the no gas engine, fully electric. Those are the the Teslas and the Chevy Bolts of the world. And that market is growing. There's more and more models coming online. So a lot of people think driving an EV is like totally different. You got to learn how to drive in a new way. And the reality is it's not. You get in an EV, there might be a few quirks to it, but the reality is it's very much just like driving a regular car. But there are some unique characteristics of EVs. One thing is they're powerful. They definitely feel much more powerful than a traditional gas-powered car if you compare equivalent models, because they have that instant torque. It's basically the electric motor's on or it's off. There's no sort of ramp up with a traditional gas-powered transmission. Even a fairly pedestrian-looking EV like the Hyundai Ioniq 5 has really remarkable acceleration and power, and equivalent to what a Corvette would have had in the 80s or 90s, if not more. So people really get a kick out of that when they get an EV. They might be a little trigger happy on that accelerator pedal, just because it can be exhilarating driving an EV because of that torque. The other aspect of driving an EV, as well as a hybrid and a plug-in hybrid, is regenerative braking, which means that power that's generated from the braking of slowing down the car gets diverted back into the battery. This also happens if you drive an EV and you can turn on one pedal driving mode. So it's sort of like a golf cart where you lift off the gas pedal and it really slows down rapidly. But if you're going downhill on a decent incline or a decline and you get that pedal right at that sweet spot, you can maintain the speed you're going, and you can see that you're just literally charging the battery as you're moving forward, because your gravity is pushing the car down the hill, and the regenerative braking and that one pedal driving is feeding all that excess energy back into the battery. EVs are really quiet. I know a lot of people driving plug-in hybrids these days, just because of the sound of that kind of like woo noise you hear when it's backing up. When I'm at a supermarket and I'm walking down the parking lot, I hear it quite regularly now, that sound of the batteries running and the vehicle backing on the parking spot. When you're actually driving one, it's interesting because there's no engine noise. So you're just hearing the tires. In some vehicles that are geared toward luxury and smooth ride, you're going to hear things outside the cabin of the vehicle while you're driving that you're maybe not used to hearing once you make the switch to an EV. So, the sounds of people playing on a playground, a hawk overhead, those kinds of external noises that get drowned out by an engine. So it's a little interesting. And EVs also have a much lower center of gravity than most vehicles, because the battery pack is basically a giant platform all the way at the bottom of the vehicle. So you're really low to the ground with that center of gravity, and if car feels really planted on the ground and very stable. So you can go around on ramps and tight corners, and you feel really rooted onto the ground. So that's another differentiating factor when you compare, say, a gas-powered pickup truck to an EV pickup truck like the Ford F-150 Lightning. It's very noticeable if you drive them kind of side by side. So EV range is one of the main things that's kind of holding back adoption of EVs, because people are worried about running out of charge. And this chart ends at 2021, but you can see that the typical range of an electric vehicle is increasing steadily. And that's because the technology is improving, battery technology is improving, and typically now it's not hard to find an EV on the market that gives you more than 200 miles of range. A lot of them are up to 300 miles of range and more, and we're hearing that in the next few years we're going to start to see EVs with up to 500 miles of range. So in reality, they're catching up to regular gas-powered cars pretty rapidly, but people still worry about range. It's one of those things that when we survey our members, that's the top thing that they're worried about. And then over the winter, you hear stories about people seeing their range really fall off in the winter or in the summer when they're running the AC. But the same thing happens to a gas-powered car. And a lot of what determines your range is really how you drive. So if you're one of those people that sticks to the speed limit and stays to the right, you're going to get way more mileage in a gas-powered car, but you're also going to get better range than if you're in the passing lane, always trying to whiz by everybody else. The other thing to remember is that the typical person only drives about 20 to 30 miles a day. The average commute in this country is well under 50 miles a day. So every EV in the market pretty much could handle someone's daily driving. It's those long road trips, really, where range becomes an issue, where you have to think about it a little bit more. But most people charge at home. They're not relying on public charging very much at all. So that's one of those misconceptions or kind of things where people think the experience of owning an EV will be like, but then reality is a lot different. The other thing that we hear a lot about and people ask us at AAA is, oh, those EV fires are really horrific. I hear they burn forever and they're super dangerous, and there's been some videos online where you see the battery packs literally exploding and they have to shut down the highway for it to burn out. Yeah, all that's true. The energy packed in those battery packs is extraordinary. If they do catch fire, it can be pretty dramatic, and fire departments have to handle an EV fire much differently than a gas-powered vehicle. The reality is, though, is that EVs are much less likely to catch on fire than gas-powered cars. If you look at the number of EVs on the road and the number of EV fires compared to gas-powered engines, it's astronomically lower. Like a gas-powered car, they catch on fire all the time. Car fires are very common occurrences. EV fires, much less common. So the reality is you're not likely to end up with your EV catching on fire. And if it does, yeah, it might be a little more dramatic, but it's one of those things where I think people are more worried than they necessarily have to be. You should be concerned, of course, but it's not that type of issue where you really have to be on high alert just because you drive an EV. Your EV is not going to just randomly catch on fire, and the chance of it catching on fire is much lower. So it's one of those things where perception is not quite the same as reality. And then EV charging, some people don't really understand the differences between slow charging, fast charging. Really, you just need to remember there's 3 levels. Level 1 is your regular wall outlet. You can plug in an EV into that. It's a regular 120 volt outlet. It's slow though, so your typical EV will take maybe up to a day or 2 to fully charge. You get about 5 miles of charge per hour, which is not a lot. But if you're somebody that commutes to the office 3 days and you have 2 days working from home, your commute's 15 miles, you might do some grocery shopping on the weekends, but you're not driving more than 20 miles a day on average. You could probably get away with just a level 1 charging by charging up overnight. You might go from 90% one day, 80 the next, 75 the next, but if you have a day or 2 over the weekend where you can leave it for a day or 2, you can get by. But the reality is most people generally, when they buy a fully battery powered vehicle, they need to upgrade to level 2 charging, similar to an electric dryer in terms of the output, and that usually goes in your garage or outside your house, much faster. That provides charge of about 25 miles of charge per hour, and time for a full charge is between 5 and 21 hours, probably much shorter than 21 hours, but that is also the similar charging speed of a lot of the chargers you see out in town or next to libraries or outside hotels, where it's not a fast charger. It's not made to charge you up rapidly. It's really to give you a nice steady charge while your car's parked overnight, so that way you're full for the day, the following day. And that makes sense for most people. And then level 3 fast charging, this is where I think the range anxiety issue will be solved. And this is these charging stations that can rapidly charge a vehicle in anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes. They do put a little more strain on the battery, they generate more heat on the battery, but these are meant for people on long road trips or long distance travelers. These are the types of chargers we're seeing installed on the Mass Pike, where the idea is you can still go check out the fall foliage in Vermont and not worry about having to plug in for hours and hours and hours along the way. And I think investment and expansion of that level 3 or DC fast charging network, similar to what Tesla has done, building out a big network across the country, that will go a long ways towards helping people feel more comfortable with the idea of buying an EV. So I mentioned we had a survey recently. This year we surveyed just under 2,000 of our members who responded. And we asked them generally, what do you think about EVs? Are you interested in them? Are you not? What's holding you back? What are your concerns? And the reality is that, our takeaway is that the early adoption phase is over and there's a lot of work to be done to get folks on board. 55% of the respondents said they never plan to buy an EV. So that's a little bit of a concern for folks that are hoping for more rapid adoption. Another 39% people said they weren't sure they would be confident if they were able to drive an EV, which is pretty interesting to us, and it tells us that maybe just a little more exposure to them, going on a test drive or knowing somebody who has an EV, that can maybe push that number down. And then the other thing that was interesting to us in our survey was that many EV owners or non-EV owners, say they want the amount of charging time to be the same as it would take to fill up at a gas station. So they don't like the idea of sitting at a public charger for 15, 20, 30 minutes. They want to be able to plug in, charge up, and then go. And unfortunately, the technology is not there. So that's one of those things that people maybe have to try to get their minds around and accept that I'm not going to be able to just quickly stop and go. Charging is going to take longer. So it's clear that there's some polarization out there. There's people that are all in on EVs, and there are people that are just, nope, not going to get it at all. There's some people in the middle who aren't sure, but it seems like people have kind of formed their opinions. So it's really going to take a little bit of time before people have more exposure to them and start to change their minds. Here's a breakdown of some of the numbers I have on the screen right now. Battery, EVs shows you, not interested at all. Battery powered, much higher. And availability of charging, that's a big concern for non-owners. But when you look at the numbers, though, non-owners who never plan to buy, non-owners who might plan to buy, they have a high percentage of them concerned about the availability of charging stations. But when you look at people who actually own EVs, they're much more satisfied. They're less concerned about the availability of charging stations. So it shows that owning an EV is not quite like what you would imagine it's like until you actually own one. EV owners are not worried about the reliability or the price nearly as much, or the battery fire safety or anything like that. It's the non-owners who never plan to buy, and the non-owners who have concerns and may plan to buy, they're much more worried about that stuff. So it really tells us that the ownership experience, more people need to talk about what it's like to own an EV. So we do have EVs at AAA. We have 36 Ford F-150 Lightnings that we've been rolling out into our fleet. There's a picture of me up there showing one off in Great Barrington earlier this year at an EV ride and drive event. And then in the middle, we have 7 Hyundai Ioniq 5s that we use for our driving school. So kids who are learning to drive, they get to drive those with our instructors, and they're a big hit. And then we have 6 traditional gas-powered vehicles. They're Fords. They're our old battery trucks, kind of retrofitted, but they have mobile charging built in. So if one of our members is actually out of a charge, we can go to them, plug them in on the roadside, top them off just enough to get to the nearest charging station or get them home. Turns out we don't really need to use them that much. EV owners tend not to run out of charge. It's kind of like we're all pretty good about making sure our phone doesn't die while we're out and about. We make sure our laptop is charged up before that big presentation. We tend to make sure our EV's got enough charge to get to where we need to go. So we tend to not use them that much. The other issue is sometimes when an EV owner does call us for roadside because they're out of charge, a lot of times it just makes more sense to just put them on the flatbed and tow them home, or tow them to a charger where they can get a fast charge, because the charging on board that truck is pretty slow, and we don't want a member to have to sit 20, 30, 45 minutes on the side of the highway. It's dangerous. We want to get them off the road as quickly as possible. The other issue that people have in terms of hesitation for EVs is the cost. According to Kelley Blue Book, the average price of a new EV in October of this year was $56,351, and you can see the gas-powered equivalent vehicle is a bit cheaper at $48,000. The good news is that EV prices are coming down. They peaked in 2022 at 66,000. Part of that is because EV manufacturers and the traditional manufacturers making EVs, they're really targeting the high-end luxury market. There's a lot of models that are 100,000 plus. There's really not enough entry level, sub $30,000 or sub $35,000 vehicles in the market yet. So there's a lot of folks who just end up buying a Honda Civic or a Toyota Corolla because there's really no equivalent EV. There is the Chevy Bolt, which is kind of one of the few out there. And then there's the new Chevy Equinox, which is about 35,000 starting, but you add some options on, next thing you know, you're pushing 40. So the makers really need to figure out a way to sell a car that starts at 28.5 maybe, or 27, and then, more people will not see that as a barrier, because there's a lot of people that would love to drive an EV, they just feel like they can't afford it. The other aspect is the used market is really starting to grow because there's a lot of leases that are ending. There's a lot of rental car companies that bought EVs that are putting them back on the market. So there's actually some really, really good deals right now on used EVs. But when we look at new cars, they're still a little bit pricier for the general public in order to really increase adoption. The main reason why they are getting cheaper, though, is that battery prices are much lower. They're not falling as sharply as they were. As you can see, 2013 to 2018 or so is really a precipitous fall in terms of the cost for battery packs and battery cells. But they're continuing to go down, so that's certainly good news. Those numbers might be hard to read, but the other thing to keep in mind about the price of EVs, and one of the things that's been driving adoption, is that there are good federal incentives for new vehicles. So you can get up to $7,500 for buying a EV from the federal government. The vehicle has to meet certain requirements. It has to be assembled in the United States. The batteries have certain mineral requirements that have to be met. The IRS and other resources online provide a list of all the vehicles that qualify. Most of the EVs on the market do qualify here in the United States. And there are some income limits, but they're pretty generous. So that means that pretty much anybody that's buying an EV, for the most part, will be able to get those credits. And one thing that's improved with this process is now that a lot of dealers are able to give you that rebate right at the purchase price, when you buy the car, so you don't have to file with the IRS and wait until tax time to get your money back. They just shave it right off the price there when you're buying the car. So that helps a lot. And then in Massachusetts, there is the More EV program. And they've made some tweaks to it in recent years. Plug-in hybrids were phased out somewhat recently. It used to be you could still get one with those, but now it's about $3,500 for an EV. And again, you can now get that at many dealerships in Massachusetts right when you buy the car, so you don't have to file a rebate after the fact. You still can. If you don't get it from a dealer that's participating in that program, you can still file for the rebate within 90 days of buying it. And you have to keep it and register it in Massachusetts for at least 3 years. And then if you meet certain eligibility requirements, you can get another $1,500 on top of that. So for folks making less than $75,000 a year, I think it is, you can get a little bit more. So if you can add the federal rebate, the state rebate, and everything else, we're talking almost $10,000 or more off the purchase price. So that's really the difference maker for a lot of people looking at, say, $42,000 EV. Suddenly when it's $32,000, then it's acceptable for them and they can make it work. The EVs in our fleet, they've been really amazing, actually. So we had some concerns as we started to roll them out. For one thing, are they going to be able to, go to a member's location, service them, and then go to another member, and then when the shift ends at the end of the day, what's the battery capacity going to look like? Are we going to be, running out of steam? Or are we going to be able to basically do everything we do with a gas-powered vehicle? And it turns out, yes. The typical F-150 Lightning, after a full shift, comes back with about 30 to 40% charge, which is more than enough. The drivers love them. They're super powerful. The great thing about not having an engine is that there is a compartment in the front called the frunk, and it's a great place for them to put their tools, their battery booster, and other things. And our members kind of get a kick out of it when they pull up, and then the front opens up, and people are a little startled by that, and they think it's pretty neat. And our technicians actually kind of fight over them to drive them for that day. They much would rather be in that F-150 Lightning than the traditional gas-powered pickup. And we don't have to fuel them up at the end of the day. And we've installed charging capability at many of our fleet locations, and that means that we are saving money on our fuel costs. And we're also installing solar at some of our facilities as well. So we have this long-term vision of kind of a closed loop where we're generating on our own power, it's going into our vehicles, it's going to save us a lot of money, it's better for the environment, and having a fleet has been great for us. And we're really excited about sharing our experience with other people because we think that the adoption of EVs for commercial fleets is a big step in decarbonizing and making progress on those goals, because there's a lot of fleet vehicles out there, and if more organizations like us with a fleet of vehicles can electrify, I think that'll make a big difference. There's really been no major surprises. We haven't had to train anybody on anything differently. We haven't really had to change our workflow. They've really just seamlessly blended in, so it's been great. And then another thing we've developed at AAA is we have a EV website, which is a great resource for folks that are curious about them. They want to see what EVs cost, they want to compare models, they want to look at a map of charging stations. Basically, it's EV 101. With a consumer perspective, you can reach it at AAA.com/EV, and a lot of the data and stuff that I discussed here is available there. And my contact information is on the screen there, and my colleague Rachel's information is there as well. And that's really a crash course in EVs, with a little bit of background on our experience at AAA. And I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any questions, or if there's any area of discussion that I overlooked.
Do you have any of those mobile charging stations that your crew could take out to an EV that's disabled?
So that's one of the things we're looking at. So the vision in the future is vehicle-to-vehicle charging. So that would allow us to take one of, say, our Lightnings, connect it to that EV, and kind of give some of that juice we have. The issue is now we're not quite there. Part of the issue is when we have a large coverage area. So if someone calculating the range that we're going to need to get to that member, figuring out how much energy we're going to give to them, and then coming back, it's a tough formula for us to figure out. And it's not like we can just use our logistics software and figure it out that easily. Our vision is likely that we will have accessory battery storage and maybe in the bed of the truck to serve as that power source to then provide that vehicle-to-vehicle power. So we're not going to give power from the Lightning itself, it'll be from another battery pack. Because currently those EV charging trucks we have, it's a gas generator, and it's so...
Defeats the purpose.
Yeah, the idea is to get that person back on the road, but yeah, it's not a good look when you pull up to an EV and then you crank up that generator and it's belching fumes, and it's one of those situations that's not ideal. The other issue is that, like I mentioned earlier, the need for roadside charging isn't quite there. So people run out of gas all the time. We're showing up with jerry cans for people all the time. It just doesn't seem to happen with EVs. Maybe as adoption increases, we'll start to see more of a need for that, particularly in areas where infrastructure is a little limited. I'm thinking of those communities, say in Massachusetts, where they're a little further away from urban centers, particularly in Western Mass. The other thing we've noticed is sometimes people will rent an EV and maybe they didn't get enough kind of training from the rental agency on how to manage that. They get on the road, they start to run low, and they realize they're 10 miles too short from the charger. That's happened a few times, but it's not like we've had enough of a demand. But vehicle-to-vehicle charging, I think, is going to be the future for that. And my suspicion is, particularly with vehicles like the F-150 Lightning and other kind of work-focused vehicles, that's going to start to become more of a standard or an optional feature that you can add on, because I'm thinking of a landscaping company that decides to switch to electric powered tools, they're going to be charging those tools from the vehicle as they're driving between job sites. It wouldn't be that hard to be able to quickly plug it into another vehicle to do the same thing. So the other thing is, daisy chaining vehicles. If you have a fleet, if you have 20 EVs, instead of having 20 chargers, you could have 1 or 2 chargers and then connect, 4 vehicles kind of in a line charged. The other aspect of vehicle-to-vehicle charging is, there's vehicle-to-grid, which is another technology that I think will be very advantageous to communities, particularly communities with, like, say, a large school bus fleet. If you think about it, basically that giant battery that's sitting there in the parking lot overnight, once it's charged, it's a huge surplus of power. So I imagine a school district over the summer, when all those school buses are parked and not being used, now that town has a backup power source. So when the grid is strained because everyone's air conditioning is cranking, those school buses are going to serve as sort of supplemental power to prevent brownouts, to move some of the grid load there. There are other parts of the country, I think California even has programs where if you have the right setup at your house, you can basically provide that service, And I think power companies are increasingly paying attention to the capability of vehicle-to-grid charging, with the idea being, we have all these people that are customers of ours. If they're all plugged in, maybe we'll give you, a discounted rate, or we'll give you money back in those instances, And there are programs in Massachusetts now between National Grid, Eversource, and then there's another community that owns its own or has its own municipal power provider. And they, if you sign up, they offer you a discounted rate for charging overnight, but you have to agree, I'm not going to charge except between like 9 p.m. and early in the morning. And you could charge outside of those times, and they'll ding you a couple times, but like generally it's an agreement that, we're going to give you power, we'll charge only overnight and I'll get a discounted rate. And the idea being that, you're easing some of the load on the grid during the day. And I think long term, they're visualizing using that vehicle to grid capability to kind of help balance their power grid. Because the reality is, if everybody went out and bought an EV tomorrow, our power grid would fry up. It's not there. Like, we just don't have the grid that we need to support that. And the concern is if everybody did that, we would have to probably start burning more coal. We're not at a point where the grid is big enough. So it has to grow a little gradually, or we're going to have to kind of tie the grid together with some duct tape and use battery backup and kind of a mishmash of different things to meet the demand. So in a way, slower adoption might be kind of a blessing in disguise, because it's going to give the grid and the infrastructure time to kind of catch up. I don't know the exact number, but some experts have indicated that for EV charging infrastructure to be adequate, there has to be like something like 5 to 10 chargers per EV on the road, which seems like overkill. But it's kind of like parking spaces for a shopping center. You need way more. I mean, you could argue that we have too many parking spaces. I mean, I think that's a given. But in terms of how they're designed, generally they kind of plan for Black Friday level of customer demand for parking spaces, and then they try to design around that. But that means you have a mostly empty lot the rest of the day. But there's a lot of gas stations for every vehicle on the road, if you think about it that way. So, on a typical drive, you're going to be driving by dozens of EV charging stations. So, the idea is that they should be ubiquitous. So it doesn't matter where you are, you should be able to pull off the highway and pretty quickly find a place to charge up.
Yeah, did you guys ever hear of a company called Spark Charge out of Somerville?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
They run Shark Tank, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I read an article that AAA had some sort of at least a test going on with them, or an agreement with those guys?
Yeah, I don't know if that was our club.
Little suitcase you just put in.
Yeah, so I don't think our club itself has done that. I know another club is doing something with them, and I think it's been pretty successful.
I know the cost is kind of prohibitive. It's like $2,500.
Yeah.
Per. So
Yeah.
they're really trying to put it into the hands of AAA as opposed to the EV driver.
Yeah.
The price was just way too high for someone to say, oh, here's my Tesla. I'm going to also have this backup in the back, and it's going to cost me another $2,000.
Yeah.
You know, the price point should start coming down.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it was $500, I would guarantee you would sell a ton of those.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. No, yeah, you're right. You had a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, what would you say is the typical cost, like electricity-wise, for charging your EV in just a regular home outlet overnight, for one of those regular commutes like you're talking about?
Yeah, so actually our website is pretty great, the AAA, the EV website, and I could even go online and even pull up a comparison, but our EV website has a breakdown of how much it would cost gas-powered versus EV based on your local kilowatt-hour price for your utility company. So it kind of depends. Public charging is always going to be a higher kilowatt-hour rate than at home. So the cheapest way to charge an EV is always going to be at home. In fact, if you are looking at an EV and you plan on only using public charging, the cost benefit really starts to shrink a little bit. And now that gas prices are like at $3 or below, you're not saving a lot of money on EV charging if you're doing a lot of public charging. You still are if you're charging at home. The problem is that electricity rates have gone up a little bit, and I understand that they're probably going to go up again this winter. And so when gas prices were at $4 a gallon or almost $5 a gallon, it was pretty dramatic how much the savings were. But it's still cheaper to charge at home than to buy gas for a gas-powered car. And it really depends on your utility company and what your kilowatt-hour rate is. Some parts of the country, way cheaper electricity, so you can have a much bigger savings. We're a little bit more expensive here in the Northeast, partly because our utility companies depend a lot on natural gas, and there is some capacity issues with natural gas here in the Northeast. So that's part of the reason why. So that's a factor. But I've talked to a few EV owners that actually have solar, and they're able to basically charge their car for free in the summer. And we, this summer we had a lot of sun and not much rain, plenty of days where you can really generate a lot of power charging during the day. And then some folks, like Tesla has that power wall, which is like a big battery you put in your garage, so you can charge that up during the day, and then at night that will start to draw power from the battery pack. So there's some people that literally are, charging their cars pretty much for free, after the upfront costs and everything. So there's that to consider. But the other cost savings for EVs, they require way less maintenance. I mean, you don't need to change your oil every 5,000 miles. You have less belts and hoses and internal combustion parts that wear out and break down. You still have a 12-volt battery, though, that will die after about 5 or 6 years and you need to get replaced, which is a traditional car battery. You still need to replace your tires and wiper belts, wiper blades and washer fluid and that sort of thing. But the overall ownership cost of an EV is a bit lower because you just don't have that constant maintenance that you have to worry about. But it kind of depends on the vehicle, though. Some high-end luxury EVs you're going to pay more for insurance. If you do get any damage to the vehicle, the repair costs may be a bit higher. But costs have been going up for gas-powered cars too, in terms of that. So it really kind of depends on the vehicle. But the long and short of it, most people will see themselves spending less driving a gas-powered car. But it's a little bit psychological. Some folks really don't like seeing that electricity bill go up a bit. So it's funny because the dollars are still going out of your pocket. It's just where and how makes people feel a little different, People are very used to, seeing that charge for that gas once or twice a week. But when that electricity bill shoots up a little bit, people, But when you break down the numbers, you're saving money. Any other questions?
I did a project in Boston, just to get to your point about jurisdictions have different rules.
Yes.
Like new construction, even remodels in the city.
Yeah.
25% of the parking spots mandated by the state, or the city of Boston as well, have to be EV ready.
Yeah. Yep. No.
It's like, a little bit overkill in my opinion, because it's going to be like, it's limited parking to begin with, and you're going to dedicate 10 spots to EV.
Yeah.
Only 2 are being used. The other tenants that pay good money to stay in this luxury condominium can't use those 5 spots.
Yep. And what you're speaking to is one of those issues we see where people get ahead of themselves a little bit. It's an admirable goal to incentivize people or create those parking spaces with the hopes that they'll get filled up and improve adoption, or you'll cater to people who drive them. But if they are empty most of the time and the rest of the spots are filled, that's going to irritate other people. People are going to start saying like, oh, these EV spaces, oh man. So that's a concern. You don't want to alienate people. On the same token, you want to build out the infrastructure to meet the demands of the people. So that's one of those balance things. It's similar to some of the issues we see in Massachusetts. I'm getting a little bit out of my wheelhouse here, but the housing crisis, right? It's too expensive to buy a house and to rent in Massachusetts for huge numbers of people. Young people who grew up here are like, oh, I'm gonna have to move out of the state because I'll never be able to start a family here. I just can't afford it. So we need more density. We need taller buildings. We need to loosen up the zoning restrictions. We need to stop requiring every building have X number of parking spaces per unit. Let's give up some of those parking spaces. People are just gonna have to ride bikes or something. But like, we need more housing units. So at what cost? What do we give up? So if you have a parking lot and there's empty spaces, that could bother some people. And it's true. I see charge point stations that are not used, and we've already kind of started to learn this lesson where a few years ago, everybody was putting a level 2 charger in front of them. Oh, I'm going to put one here. We're going to put one in front of the library. There's one at the Whole Foods near where I live.
Yeah.
No one ever uses it because the people that go to Whole Foods, they charge at home. They're going from home to Whole Foods and back. They don't need to charge for 30 minutes at Whole Foods at level 2. So these chargers are not getting used very much. It's those level 3 chargers where people are far from home when they need them. Yes?
And also the location of EV chargers. Typically, parking lots, they're far in the back.
Yes.
It's very dark, and as a woman, you don't wanna wait there that long. Where it's not convenient. If I'm gonna go to the grocery store, I'm walking, way too far to get back into my car.
That's an excellent point, and that was one of those things we asked about in our survey. And I don't think the numbers here are very clear, but you can see safety. They're very worried about safety at EV charging stations. That's where that safety comes in a big way. That's what that means. I have 2 young daughters. When they're driving, I don't like the idea of my daughter sitting alone in a car in the back of a parking lot. A lot of the EV charging stations, they don't have canopies, so you're exposed to the elements. The lighting can be poor. And I've seen that where, you're at some place and then the charging is way around the corner in the back, next to the loading dock, and you kind of feel like, am I supposed to be here? And so definitely we need to see improvement in that, and that's a very good point. There's a lot of shopping plazas I've gone to where they have some nice EV charging, but it's like way on the end. I'm one of those people, I like to park at the end of the lot and walk. I get my steps in that way, but if you're gonna go to Target and charge and you gotta walk, all the way through the parking lot or across the street to get there, that's gonna discourage people when they're used to just popping into the Shell station and filling up and then being on their way.
Plus there's a challenge if there's X amount of charging stations and they're all taken, some people are basically fully charged and they're still parked there.
That's another thing. So EV charging etiquette is one of those things that people realize once they get an EV.
Most people are, the honor system.
Yeah.
But there's those, the people that are not even thinking about, I'm gonna park my car there overnight, it's gonna be done charging in 6 hours, and I'll probably be here 12 hours.
Yeah, I've seen that. Speaking of that Whole Foods, I remember one time I was walking into the supermarket and I glanced over at, there was I think a Volkswagen e-Golf. It was plugged in, and there was a note on and it said, your car's been here for hours, and I waited for an hour and a half. Like, please like let other people use this charger, you know? So somebody was obviously like sitting there waiting for that person to leave, waiting and waiting. Maybe they were on a trip and that was like the one charger they didn't have enough charge to get to the nearest one and they had to wait and they got frustrated because like, when's this person? So maybe it was an employee of the Whole Foods who was working a long shift. So, and that's the other thing too, if you are showing up at a public charging area and all the stalls are taken, and there's a car and there's nobody in it and it's plugged in, you know, are they done charging? So some charging stations and companies have a system set up where if it detects your car is fully charged, it'll start penalizing you. Like, yeah, it's like after 10 minutes, so here's a $5, you know, and in another 10 minutes, here's another $5 we're gonna take from you. Or they'll text you and alert you. And a lot of the newer cars, like they'll tell you like, oh, your car is almost done charging. So when you're in the store, you're like, ooh, we gotta go unplug. Then I've seen discussions online, like, is it okay to unplug somebody who's done charging? Like, I can see it's done, it says it's done. Like, is it wrong for me to like physically remove that and then stick it in mine? And what should I do? So these are kind of those social interactions that we haven't quite figured out yet. And again, those issues would be resolved with widespread charging. But for the most part, you know, I think that's kind of it comes with the territory, you know. Owning an EV is a little bit of an adventure, I think. There are people that like the new thing. They like to try different things. They like the idea of having to really plan a little bit more, you know, which sounds crazy, but I'm kind of like that. You know, I like the idea of, you know, at AAA we were known for triptychs where, you know, I don't want to just get in the car and put the address in GPS and just blindly follow it. I want to like pull out that road atlas and well, look, that's interesting. You know, let's take this route and then we can stop at that little farm stand and then, you know, to kind of take the long way. And I think for owning an EV, it's similar to that, where you think, you know, we're going to go maybe 200 miles and then we'll stop and maybe we'll have lunch here. This is like, and you pull up the map and you look, and so we can plug in here and go to this coffee shop, and then maybe we'll walk around and then we'll continue our journey that way. So there's some folks that's very appealing and an EV fits right in. But yeah, you know, and unreliable charging stations, that's been an issue. That's improving a little bit. We're hearing less of that, but a couple years ago, a lot of broken chargers. A lot of people showing up and there's only one charger and two of them, you know, there's three chargers, but only one's working, two are broken and somebody's already at the one. And so you knock on them, are you almost done? Or, you know, and that people don't want to manage that. They don't want to deal with that, you know. So the availability and reliability of charging is certainly one of those barriers.
For your fleet that you showed there, how do you charge those vehicles? Overnight in like level 2 or is it level 3?
Yeah, we have level, that's a good question. I believe they're level 2. They're supplied by Ford. So we got a deal with Ford as part of our purchase of the fleet. So we have our West Springfield fleet facility has one charging station. I think in Providence we have 2 at our fleet garage, and then we have 2 at our headquarters where the driving school Hyundai Ioniq 5s plug in. And yeah, it's like it hasn't been an issue for us, you know, and most of the vehicles we're able to charge them up overnight. And they're distributed throughout our territory enough that like it's not like one, you know, we have to like plug in, you know, 5 on one charger and can't drive that one today because we didn't get to charge it last night. So that's been our thinking all along, was as we expand our fleet, we also have to expand our charging and to accommodate that, because we don't want 36 F-150s, but only 5 can be used in a day because there's a backlog of having to charge them up. So that's one of those things that fleets are going to have to think about. Not only, you know, getting the EVs and getting their heads around it, but also how are you going to charge them overnight.
So they're behind the gate then, your chargers, they're not public facing, correct?
We have private facing ones, but we do have a public facing one at our headquarters, and then we're opening up, if we haven't already, a public charging location at our Warwick, Rhode Island AAA branch. And we're going to try to add more at more of our branches and other facilities throughout our territory. So AAA Northeast, we're in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey. not all of New York and all of Connecticut. There's a couple chunks that different clubs, AAA map, territory is a little confusing, but Northeast, we're one of the larger clubs, but we have all of Massachusetts, and we've got a lot of branches. Some of them we own, some of them we lease, some of them the parking lot's just not doable, but some are. So we're looking at each one kind of on an individual basis, because our members have been asking about it.
They would show up on like an app so people would know they were there.
Yeah, yeah.
Even if they were just sort of randomly near your spot in Warwick.
Well, that's it. Yeah, they're on the charging maps, so you will see them as options if you're poking around, depending on whether you're using the in-dash map or you use something like our website. So they should be showing up. But yeah, no, it's great. And I've gotten to take both the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and the F-150 Lightning out a few times. Our fleet folks have been really good to us at AAA, where they're really encouraging employees to drive them and experience them and see what it's like. And that Great Barrington picture, I got to drive out there, and then I stayed in a hotel overnight, and then I went to the event during the day, and then I drove home. So it was a good experience to be like, I'm driving all the way to Western Mass, whoa, all the way, a foreign country out there, and I didn't have to charge it. I thought I would maybe have to charge along the way, but I got there and I had plenty of range, and then I started heading back, and I was like, oh, I might actually be able to make it all the way back to the fleet facility, and I did. Sure enough, I was down to like 25% battery, and I wasn't driving gingerly. I was driving with the flow of traffic, so it was a good experience. And
Charge at the hotel in Great Barrington?
They didn't have charging there. So when I booked the hotel with our travel in-house travel department that books employee travel, I indicated that I wanted that, but they weren't able to do it in Great Barrington. Yeah. So that was unfortunate, but that's okay, at the end of the day. And I was prepared to use the dash and find a charging spot, and I've gone on other trips in the Ioniq 5 to like Connecticut and back. For different employee stuff we've done. And I have had to stop and do a fast charge. We stopped at a Target, I think it was, and we fast charged and we got a coffee and wandered around. We went to Yankee Candle for like 15 minutes, and then we came back, and it got us from like 30% to like 80%, and we were only there for about 15 minutes. So that was kind of a wake-up call for me. Like, wow, this is doable, because I'm the kind of person where if I have to take a 15-minute break during a trip and walk around a little bit and stretch my legs, that's great. People have dogs. You're going to have to let the dog out and walk them around at the rest stop. And you see people doing that on long road trips anyways. And as a traffic safety person, we encourage people to take a 15-minute break from driving every 2 or 3 hours. Stretch your legs. It helps you maintain focus while you're driving. Yeah, stay alert. That's important. So there's that. And you think if there's a future where everybody's driving EV, there's a lot of gas stations out there that are going to go out of business, right? If we don't need gas anymore, what's going to happen to all that land and all those gas stations? What does a charging center look like, And if everyone's charging at home and they really only need charging on those road trips, we're not going to see as many gas stations in dense areas, Will we need a gas station at the corner of Main Street if everybody leaves town fully charged? That gas station might not get much business at all eventually. So that'll free up land that's being occupied by gas stations. But at the same token, if we're going to have a lot of people charging at some place like the Mass Pike, say they expand it even more, they might have to put in a walking trail and more facilities for people, maybe more food. So I think there's a business to be had catering to road trippers who need to charge. What are the kind of things they want to do? And we're already seeing those large travel centers along the major freeways where you can go and, like truckers park and they can sleep and they can take a shower and that sort of thing. They're putting in charging stations knowing that people are going to need, 15 to 30 minutes to stretch their legs, get a coffee and do their thing. So they're realizing that there's a good market out there.
Sturbridge, Mass in your territory?
Yep.
There's a place called Noble Energy.
Ah.
And it's like a Cumberland Farms.
Okay.
Based out of Hartford, Connecticut.
Yeah.
And it's what you just described.
Yep.
It's a gas station / charging station.
Yeah.
And there's a full restaurant inside.
Yep.
So if you had 30 minutes to charge, it won't take you longer than filling your gas tank.
Yep.
But there's stuff to do inside.
Yes, exactly.
It's like real food, not just
Yep.
grab and go food.
Yeah, I think a lot of people now, they just sit in the car and they like watch TV or listen to a podcast or play a video game on the screen, which I guess you can do in some vehicles,
And to your point,
which is
it's a
fine.
little safer in that environment.
Yeah.
It's well lit.
Yeah.
Full blown sort of Cumberland Farms sort of looking.
Yeah.
And it's not in the back of the Target.
Yeah, exactly.
You're all alone.
Yeah, who knows? You might meet other people and
Yeah.
make friends
You
and
said wander around.
Yeah.
You know.
join a pickup frisbee game, and next thing you know, like, oh, do we have to leave? It's nice here,
But the other technology thing that's happened, you probably know, is like the North American charging standard.
Yes.
Now that's going to allow people to, before this year, no one could use the Tesla charging
Yes.
station except Tesla drivers.
Yes.
Now when I'm parked in there, I'll see a Cadillac Lyric come in and an Audi. I'm like, that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's big, and I'm glad you mentioned that. That's a huge deal. Just having a universal standard goes a long way. That way, you don't have to worry about what EV you buy. You don't feel like, oh, I can only use, ChargePoint or, all those Tesla people, they got their amazing setup over here and I'm stuck over here. Now it's open for everybody. That's a win-win for everybody.
It hasn't been well publicized, but it should be more.
It should be more, and it's funny because it's been kind of a weird rollout where I know some people who bought, because there's some people that got a little frustrated because they bought an EV a year or two ago and then they announced that they're going to be joining the standard and they're like, oh great, so now I need an adapter. The automakers are supplying those adapters to some of those people for free, which is great. That just means you got to remember to keep it with you. But a lot of people are realizing that, like, once you use that adapter, you never really need to use the old method anymore. And we're going to start to see competing charging networks using the same standards. So it's great,
There's something called a plug-in charge now. Tesla already has it, where you just plug in and walk away.
That's it.
There's no authentication like it's Mr. Hayes and log into your app. None of that. You just plug in and walk.
Yeah, then we need more of that. One of the barriers or one of the annoyances that people have is that these days it's like you do need a separate app for each charging system that you're using, and then you got to put in your credit card information, and then people want to be able to just go up to the thing, swipe a card, or scan the QR, the Apple Pay, and just immediately charge. They don't want to have to sign into some new app and register an account.
Especially when it's minus 15 out and snowing.
That's it.
And you're trying to plug in.
That's it.
You want to get out, plug in, and get back in your car.
Yeah, or you got somebody in the back crying. They got to go to the bathroom. Somebody's tired. That's one more pain point that I think the industry is going to finally get around to fixing.
It was the best choice for Ford and GM and Chrysler to do that with Elon Musk, just because he built the infrastructure, 15,000 charging stations across the U.S. Before he built the first car.
Yep, that was a very smart move by him, and I think he, say what you want about Elon Musk, he, did recognize that you got to actually kind of put the cart before the horse, a little bit with that,
Now he's sharing it kind of. Before it was proprietary, you couldn't use it, and I think it's a good thing to help increase the adoption rate of EVs.
Yeah, absolutely.
For non-Teslas.
Yeah.
So, technology, powerful.
Yeah, it is.
It'll get better.
Yeah, it will.
There will be one app at some point, so
absolutely.
if you want to invent that, you'll make a lot of money.
Hey, look at credit cards. The first credit card was Diners Club, and I remember when I had a Discover card, and I'm like, are you on the Nova's network? And it's like, now it's, unless you have an Amex, some people don't take Amex, but you don't think about
Very compatible.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so you don't have to worry about that.
Even see people struggling all the time on the, when you stop in the rest areas. They get the CCS1 plug, and there's the CHAdeMO, and there's the normal J17.
Yep.
And they're like,
yeah. Well, and then there's some cars that can't charge as fast as other cars, even on level 3. So they're like, "Why are you on that one? You should be on this one. Now I have to use a slow one. We should swap because I can max out, but you can't." And you're like, well, "I don't know. I just pulled up. I don't know." So there's.
Because you mentioned people renting cars at airports.
Yes.
Those are the people.
Yeah.
They're trying to figure out. Wait, I came into Boston and there's a wedding in Portland, Maine, and I got to get my car back to Logan. I don't know where to go to charge.
Yeah, and I've seen videos and photos. I don't know if they're staged, but of people with a Tesla at a gas station, holding the gas thing, and they're like, wait a minute, how do I?
What color?
What's going on? It says low. I don't know.
So that comes with time.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, just like any new.
Like this that you did tonight.
Yeah.
That just makes it less anxious.
Just like any new technology, you know, when desktop and home computers are coming in, you know, you need, you know, the manual was this thick, and you know, it was complicated, and you know, nothing was compatible with anything. And now it's like, you know, Mac or PC doesn't matter. You know, every website works on every device. You can, you know.
Tesla already has the robo-taxi.
Yeah.
We saw that routine a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
With that announcement out in California. That's the autonomous car.
Yeah.
That's just around the corner as well.
Yeah, it is.
Taxi cab's going to come up and pick you up. There's not going to be anyone driving it.
Yeah, eventually, if we could get fully autonomous vehicles, it would, you know, from AAA's perspective, there's a real equity issue there where, you know, imagine a blind person could drive, you know, you could go anywhere. If you're too old to drive, doesn't matter, you're still going to be able to get transportation. And, you know, that's a big game changer. So we are hopeful that we get to a time where, you know, your physical decline doesn't mean you can't get to where you need to go.
So, yeah, it's all good.
Very good.
Great job.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Very informative.
Thank you very much.
As far as crowd, but we,
Yay, it's all right.
we showed up.
Yep. And we got it on video, so I think, you know, people at home will watch it. And I'm always happy to answer anyone's questions via email or anything like
Do you have a
that.
card, Mark?
I don't have a card. We're trying to
I'll give you mine.
reduce our paper. Yeah, excellent.
So that's, my company actually builds